Hello everybody and welcome back to Alan Wall's Photography. I'm Alan and this is video number 3 in our macro focus stacking series. Well, welcome to the third video in our macro focus stacking series. In video number 1 we learned how to prepare and preserve and relax and pose our insect. In video number 2, we learned how to shoot the photographs using a focus rail and controlled lighting. And in video number 3, we're going to go into the computer and we're going to learn how to focus stack these multiple shallow depth of field images into one spectacular insect image at the end. There are a few things I need to clear up from the previous videos. The first is I've been calling this thing a hornet ever since we started, and I think I've just never taken a close enough look at it. It was big and orange, and it looked like a hornet. It's not a hornet. It's a specimen of Vespula squamosa, which is the yellow jacket. And what makes this yellow jacket unusual is it is a queen. And that was my mistake. So this is a very large queen Vespula squamosa yellow jacket. Problem number 2 that I want to straighten out is the number of photographs I ended up with. As I mentioned in the video, it was 93 was the final number, yet we had calculated based on the depth of field and the incremental movements of the focusing rail. We'd estimated that we'd only need 43 or 48 images. So what went wrong? Well, actually nothing went wrong with the calculations. They were spot on. The problem was I think I had over tightened the focusing rail to the point that when I thought I was moving it about 1/2 to 3/4 of a millimeter on each turn, I was probably only moving it 1/3 of a millimeter. And I was at least consistent, but I underestimated the travel of the rail, and that's one of the problems of manual rails. I have used this one so many times, I was overconfident that I would be able to get it done in that number accurately. But it's always better to be over than under. If you're over, you're going to have lots more overlap. It also is going to put a real challenge to the computer, especially to my poor old computer, which is feeling its age, as to whether or not it can stack this many images based on the size and the spare room that I have on my scratch disks. And I'll explain that when we get into it. There are some changes you can make in your preferences in Photoshop that will allow you to work with more or bigger files like this, but we'll figure a way around it. The third issue is you'll see as soon as we take a look at the photographs that I got that there is some ugly gunk all over this queen wasp's back. And I remembered that when this wasp flew into the house, I killed it. I killed it with bug spray, which I normally don't do. When I do, I usually mark the container with an S so that I know for sure that this one is going to need additional treatment to get it ready. And I had not marked this canister, and I had forgotten about the bug spray, so you'll see very clearly that the hair around the junction of the head and the thorax, which is normally beautiful and spiky and very fine silky hair, is all kind of matted with a thick waxy layer of revolting gunk. So my bad. I'll know better next time, but I decided to leave it in and use these images that we've already got, if nothing else, to show you that lesson about bug spray, because it does significantly degrade the quality of the insect shot. Well, we're ready to get started. We're going to take our images on the card that they were originally recorded to, and we're going to download them into Lightroom. I presume you know how to do that. I like to load them into a separate file with a separate file name and number them sequentially so I can keep track of what's going on. We'll then move those images over to Photoshop as one massive file of images, and then we'll go through the process of aligning all the images together and then building the stack, and we'll see if the computer can handle it. Once we get done with that, I'll walk you through the process of using a third-party stacker. It's actually one that is really designed to use with Windows. We're going to be doing this work on a Mac, but it still works pretty well on a Mac, and that's the Zerene Stacker. And I'll show you through the various steps and where that program's a little bit different. But I think we're going to get great photos from both of them. So, with no further rambling, let's get into the computer and see what we can do. So here we are in Lightroom, and we have all 93 of our images captured here. They're in a single file. If we open the file, we can take a look at the first image and see that only the tip of the right antenna is in sharp focus. If we go to the very end of the series and click on number 93, we can see that just the rim of the wing in the back and the left foot, second foot back, or third maybe, is in sharp focus. And each of the other 89 images have their little piece that's in focus. So let's select all of those, right-click on any one of them, and go to Edit In, and then Open as Layers in Photoshop. It's the last option on the menu, and this will send each of these images into a separate layer in a single image file in Photoshop. Now, this process took such a ridiculously long time, I made an executive decision. After importing all of these, aligning them all, and merging them, it took close to 4.5 hours of processing time, and I decided that's just ridiculous. I'll lose the whole flow of the video. So what I decided to do was go back to Lightroom, and I selected every third image. And then I redid the process of loading them into Photoshop as layers, just to make this thing go a little bit faster. So here we are. We select all of the images. This is every third image now. We select them all by clicking the first one, then scrolling down to the last one, hitting Shift and click. And then we go up to Edit and go to Auto Align Layers. And it'll give you some options. Just choose the auto, leave the other boxes unchecked, and click OK. Now, this process with the 93 images took a couple of hours. I've never seen it quite so bad. Even this video is actually accelerated like 5,000% just so that you can watch the process. But this is necessary because the camera was moving and the image was changing size. So we had to get the computer to align all of these images together so that when we merged them, there wouldn't be gaps, of course, in the composite. So with the smaller number, the 30-something images, it only took about 15 minutes. And then when that was done, with all of the layers still clicked and active, we go back up to the Edit tab, and in there now we'll find an Auto Merge Layers, which is right next to the alignment one. Press that, select Stacked Images, not Panorama, and make sure the other two boxes are checked. And once again, click OK and let it do its thing. Now, what it's doing in this process, it's taking each of the images and selecting those portions that are in focus, and then it is creating a layer mask for each of the layers in the image, and it's basically blocking them from being part of the composite. And then at the very end, it generates what it calls a panorama, which is the full composite. We end up with a single composite layer with all of the out of focus parts masked out. And if you look on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you'll see where those masks have been created. And eventually, at the top of that list, one merged photograph will appear. You'll see I made a very rookie mistake here. Once all the layers were merged into a single image, I went ahead and cropped the image to get rid of the white halos around the edge, which I should have done after I flattened the image, not before, because the process of cropping meant cropping all of the images in the composite. So you can see here, this step should have been done after I merged everything down into a flattened image. But it eventually got cropped anyway. It's the same end result. But once that happened and we have one single cropped image, we need to get rid of those layers unless you're going to need them for something later on. What you do is go up to the merged layer, right-click on that, and it brings you a whole bunch of options. Near the bottom is the choice to flatten the image. That will get rid of the composite layers and leave you with one flattened image. Voila. Now I hit Command J to duplicate that so that I would have a layer to work on and an untouched layer underneath should I need it. And now I just used a number of fairly standard editing tools to start the laborious process of cleaning all of this bug spray off of our wasp. And it is going to be a massive job. I'm not going to put you through it. I thought I'd just show cleaning up this one antenna to show you the detail and the complexity of it. I'm using here the content-aware eraser, which is great for specks and spots that are in parts of the image that are otherwise fairly uniform, like the middle of these segments. Where the segments touch, however, that's not a good place for using the content-aware eraser because it doesn't know that those joins are not actually what you're trying to remove. So once I remove the bulk of them, then I start the more meticulous work of moving around small areas using the clone stamp tool. And that allows me to move structures like the joints between the antenna segments into position. Same thing on the eye. That eye is going to take an awful lot of work to clean up. At least this is proving everything I warned you about with killing insects with bug spray. You can see now what a terrible mess it leaves. Getting rid of the pin. Usually the bulk of this, I'll just select the biggest mass of pin and use the patch tool to move it to one side and get rid of the whole thing all in one move. Then I'll deselect the selection by hitting Command D. And in this case, I started out by grabbing the content-aware eraser tool again and just scribbled out the little bottom bit of the pin. And some of the shadowing left behind by the patch tool. That took a few passes to get rid of that subtle gray discoloration. Now, removing the pin where it crosses limbs and body parts is difficult. So it's very important to do everything you can to avoid having that pin visible around the body. This is not bad. Having one limb crossing is certainly fixable, and I'll remove as much of it as I can with just a content-aware tool. But most of this involves some pretty creative clone stamping, where I'll, for example, you can see that I'm sourcing adjacent leg segments to use. To replace the parts where the pin is crossing. I even go over to the next limb up on that left-hand side and move one of its segments over, or parts of it, just to give me the same kind of specular highlights that you can see on the other limbs. I want this limb to look as if it's being lit exactly the way the other ones are. I don't want shadows from where the pin used to be. And this just takes time. So cleaning up this whole insect is gonna take a long time and a lot of effort, but I enjoy doing it. It's fun, and at least you can see results. It's not like waiting for Photoshop to assemble your image. So we're about done with this part, and I am going to then show you how this whole process can be done using my preferred stacking method, which is Zerene Stacker. This is an absolutely fantastic piece of software. It's not free, you have to buy it, but I have never owned a piece of software that comes with the kind of support and backup that Zerene does. It's the owner, the guy who wrote the code, and he's in charge of the whole company. And if you ever have issues or need some help or guidance, the guy answers the phone when you call him. So it's that, to me, is worth the price of admission. But Zerene Stacker, once it's installed on your computer, you can actually build shortcuts so that you can take photographs directly out of Lightroom directly into Zerene, which is what we're going to do as soon as I get through fiddling around with this last little bit of the pin. Now, the process of stacking images in Zerene is very different. Now, I don't know enough about the actual computer program to talk very intelligently about it, but what I do know is that to stack images in Zerene, you need to be using TIFF files. I think it also works with JPEGs, but I like to keep the larger files for editing like this, where you need every possible scrap of information in the photograph. So I think this was about where I quit with the editing. You can see there's still a ton to do to get the rest of that gunk off of him. Her, I mean, it's a queen. But I'm not going to put you through any of that, so we'll just save the project and I will come back to it and finish cleaning it up later. Let's go back to Lightroom, and we'll do the same thing that I did in selecting the photographs for the Photoshop stack. And I'll select every third image, starting with image number 3. I think the first 2 images were a little out of focus on the right antenna. So I select every third, which seemed to work with Photoshop just fine, and I know that there's plenty of overlap. And with all 31 of these images selected, I need to send them over to Zerene Stacker. Now, fortunately, Lightroom allows you to add plugins in such a way that it's a single button press to send these over, which is good, because otherwise I would need to put them in a holding file somewhere and then convert every one of them to a TIFF file, because Zerene works with TIFF and JPEGs, but I like to keep as much of the detail as I possibly can, so I will import all of these images into Zerene as TIFF files. So while they're loading, let me tell you just a couple of important things about Zerene. It gives you the option to use 2 different algorithms to do your merging, your stacking. And they both have different characteristics, and really to get the most out of the program, you want to use them both. So I'll explain what each of them are while they're loading, but all of the images that we just sent over from Lightroom will appear in the project panel on the left. And what we do is we select the top one on the list, and then we go to Stack and select Align and Stack All. Now, what that command does is instruct Zerene to use both of the algorithms. Firstly, the PMax algorithm, which is a pyramid algorithm that is excellent at selecting very fine detail, especially where hairs cross hairs, that type of thing. And it generates an output image that's called PMax. Zerene then automatically runs the second algorithm, which is DMap, a depth map, and creates a second output image. Now, DMap is particularly good at preserving color and the surface textures and contours of the photograph. But for it to do that accurately, halfway through the process, it's going to ask us for our input. And this is an opportunity for us to set the contrast exactly the way we want it. And there's a slider that you can move. If you move it to the left, everything in the frame is going to be interrogated by the program. If you move it all the way to the right, everything gets blacked out, including our specimen, and the program won't pay attention to any of the data. So what we're trying to find is the point at which everything we're not really that interested in is masked off in black, and everything that we want the program to pay very close attention to is left transparent. So in this case, I think somewhere around 76 or so was what I thought looked best. As soon as you select that level, you just click OK, and the program will then finish off with the DMap stacking. And while the differences between the PMax and the DMap images may seem subtle, they seem a lot less subtle when you really zoom in close, and especially if you blow these photographs up for large size prints. So as the DMap second output image is being completed, we can take a closer look at the PMax, which is the image on the right. And it does have a considerable amount of detail in the tiny features of the photograph, the hairs in particular. There's much less crossing artifact that you do see quite frequently in the DMap image. But looking at the PMax here, I think it's very close to being exactly what I want out of this photograph, but I would like to see more of the color and texture that was apparent in the DMap image. So what we'll do is I'll zoom in a little bit, let you get a good close look at the PMax, and then I'll select a separate image from the field on the left. We can switch now to the DMap for you to compare. And when I do, right there, you can see the subtle but real change in color and texture. You have to try this for yourself, I guess, and wear strong reading glasses like I do. But it does make a huge difference. Now, in the perfect world, you could take the parts that you like from one and put them in the parts that you don't like from the other, which is what we're going to do now. If you go to Edit and hit Start Retouching, this is the real magic of Zerene Stacker. It allows us to select our basis for an output image, and in this case, I'm going to choose the PMax, and that is now on the right-hand side. And then I will select a source image, and while I could select any of the layers that we have in the project panel, I'm actually going to choose the DMap because I know for a fact that there are things in the DMap image that I want to replace the corresponding part in the PMax. So what we'll do is we'll zoom in, and you'll notice that when I pan and move around in the frame, both images move simultaneously. So we have the PMax image on the right, and there is quite a bit of artifact around the stinger. I noticed some. There's also some in the hairs on the underside of the thorax. And if we zoom in on the antenna, there's quite a bit of ghosting artifact around the right antenna. Now, looking at the DMap image on the left, I don't see any of that. Here I'm replacing some of the rounder contour from the image on the left into the flatter areas on the right-hand side. Let's look at these antennas. And right away in the PMax image, you can see this gray ghosting at the root of the antenna. and that does not manifest in the DMap image on the left. So all I have to do is paint that area with the brush, and it basically clones that same area from the image on the right. So it allows me to keep all of the detail that I like in the PMax image, while it allows me to improve the colors and contours and get rid of ghosting like this in the other image. Then it's just a matter of going all the way around, and that you're going to find things, artifact that shouldn't be there, that you're going to want to deal with in Photoshop. This is not the place to actually do any further manipulation, but you can see here around the stinger a lot of artifact very quickly and easily removed by swapping out parts of the PMax for parts of the DMap. Even around the pin, I want the pin to be as sharp as possible for when I remove it in Photoshop. And talking of Photoshop, I love Photoshop, I have nothing against it, but when it comes to detailed, accurate focus stacking, I really think that Photoshop has a way to go before it can compete with Zerene Stacker. As soon as you're done with your touching up, you just accept those changes, and it will give you a third output image, which is the hybrid, which you can then save, or for that matter, take straight back over to Photoshop and clean up any last little things you need to do, and you are done. Well, there you have it. That's all there is to it. That is focus stacking for you. Practice this just a little bit, and you should have your photographs shown in National Geographic in no time, I am sure. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was useful for you. If it was, please leave me a thumbs up or subscribe to the channel. Either one would be great. Both would be spectacular. I'll be back soon with another interesting video on a completely different topic that I'll tell you about as soon as I figure out what it is. Until then, stay safe, have fun, take lots of good pictures, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.